This video is brought to you by the wonderful people supporting me on Patreon. Thank you for making videos like this possible by sending me a monthly tip. Hi, welcome back to the channel. My name is Louie, I go by they them pronouns. I'm an illustrator, and maybe because I am an illustrator, I absolutely adore everything that has to do with comics and graphic novels. Also, I recently went to the Bologna I children's book fair, and therefore comics are just very much on my mind right now. And I thought if you enjoy illustration and you enjoy storytelling, you might really like these books that I have for you today. The first book I have for you is called The Prince and the Dressmaker, and I think if you enjoyed Heartstopper and you also like historical fiction, then you might like this. It is the story of Prince Sebastian, who dresses up as Lady Christella at night, and it's also the story of Frances, who's a seamstress and starts working for Prince Sebastian, and the relationship that develops between the two. What I really appreciated about this book is that it doesn't really label whatever is going on with Prince Sebastian and Lady Christella. Like, is it drag? Is it Sebastian being trans? Is it a genderqueer character? Is it gender fluid? Like, there isn't a need for word, and I think while having labels to describe your queer identities is incredibly important, and we need to educate people about these labels, it can also be very freeing to just see queer representation that doesn't have a need for it, that just works in... It's just about freedom of expression. It's just about, hey, this might be something queer, or maybe it isn't queer at all. We don't know, we never find out. And also it's not really relevant because it's about joy and about being able to express who you are and express however you want to express. And I think that's just a really important message. The pacing was really well done, especially in the first half, in my opinion. And it does have this very Disney fairy tale princess vibe to it, but it doesn't really rely on the tropes as much. Like, the main character who likes to dress up is Prince Sebastian, so that's already like flipped on its head. But also it's very common in fairy tales for the main character or the heir to the throne to not have both parents and to have some trauma attached to having lost a mum. That's like a very common thing to happen in fairy tales. It's not happening in this one. That being said, I would have loved to see more of the relationship between Prince Sebastian and the parents, but this book is intended for middle graders, so I get why it doesn't focus on that, why it doesn't focus on the parents' point of view. As an adult, I would have been more interested in that, but maybe I'm just not the target audience, and that is completely fine. Another thing that fell a little bit flat for me was the class differences between Prince Sebastian and Frances. I think they should have maybe been explored a little bit more, but again, this is a book for middle graders, and one book can't do everything, so I won't hold it against this book, because I think Frances was a beautifully written character who was so passionate and driven, and she wasn't about like, oh, this is Prince Sebastian and this could be important to me. She was all about her dream of being a fashion designer and making clothes and being creative, and taking that opportunity when it presented to herself. I would have preferred a different ending to the relationship between Frances and Prince Sebastian, but that's just me. You might like the ending, but yeah, I've seen mixed reviews online about the ending to this book. But overall, it is a very cute and heartwarming and lovely story. With that being said, there need to be some content warnings for this book. One of the plot points is a forced coming out, which at this point in time feels very been there, done that. Do we really need to retell stories of being forced to come out? I'm not sure. It felt like it only served the purpose of the plot and the drama. and I didn't really understand why it was needed, other than like as a plot point, to create some tension. And another content warning that you might need for this book is one thing I found on Storygraph. Storygraph is a website where you can kind of keep track of your readings and like give them 1 to 5 star reviews, and also keep content warnings visible for other readers. It's an amazing website. I will link it in the caption. And in one of the reviews for The Prince and the Dressmaker, I read that the father of Prince Sebastian looks incredibly similar to Leopold II of Belgium, which I looked up and kind of agree with. And Leopold II of Belgium was very, very heavily involved in colonialism. I will leave a link to a Wikipedia article about that in the caption as well. And yeah, it can take you out of the fictional world that is built in this book a little bit. I'm not sure that these similarities were intentional. Like, is that supposed to be hinting at this book being set in Belgium? I don't know. Maybe I should have researched. But yeah, be aware of that before you're going into this book. Other than that, the art style is absolutely beautiful, and I love how all the characters are designed, except for the king, obviously. I'm constantly inspired by the colors, the layout, the line work. It is just very good, very heartwarming. Can recommend. The next book I have is The Girl from the Sea, which, again, if you enjoyed Heartstopper, but you would also like to see a sapphic kind of romance, then this is the book for you. It also has some elements of magic or magical realism to it, or like fantasy, folklore kind of stuff. It is a YA coming out story, which can be basically described as teenager meets Selkie. And Selkie, as far as I can tell from reading one Wikipedia entry, are a legend or folklore mythology that originated in Scotland. Selkie meaning seal folk, describing people who can shapeshift between seals and humans by shedding their skin. This book mainly tells the story of the two main characters, Morgan and Kelty. It also has some elements of biodiversity or environmental protection to it, and there's also some plot points about the friendships that Morgan has, but mostly it is a book about queer identity and queer romance. The two girls have very different relationships to their own queerness, like Kelty being very unbothered and very secure in her identity. And on the other hand, we have Morgan, who is introduced as a character who daydreams about like going to university and then finally being able to live without that secret that she's hiding from everybody currently. And she's also very unsure of how her family will respond, her friends will react. She just wants to be normal and fit in. It is set in a rural area, which I think plays into that. And this idea of like, oh, I just need to make it to university and then I can finally explore my identity, then I can finally be who I want to be. I was able to relate to that a lot, and I think many queer people will be able to relate to that aspect of the story. Morgan and Kelty having a very different relationship with their own queerness brings a very interesting dynamic into their relationship and into their romance, and I think that was done beautifully, because it is a thing that comes up in queer dating, that you're maybe dating someone who's very baby queer, and maybe you have some more queer experiences or like queer self-confidence or whatever. And that can lead to conflict, or like you need to communicate about that, and I think that is shown in the story in beautiful ways. I think it did need some more reflecting on some of the conflict and how it's been handled, because Morgan being very anxious and being very insecure about herself and about her life, and about the choices the feelings she's having, is sometimes a bit of an arsehole to Kelty, to her family, and also to her friends. And it is talked about. It isn't like just like, oh yeah, she's allowed to be an asshole. But I think that could have maybe needed some more self-reflection on Morgan's end. But then again, the story is told from Morgan's point of view, like mainly told from her point of view. And I think as a teenager, maybe you just don't have that self-reflection. So maybe it's really well done. I really did enjoy that feeling of not being able to get out of your own head that is really portrayed in this book, because Morgan is just, yeah, a self-centered teenager, like we all were at some point, and can't really see past her own struggles. It just feels very raw and also very honest, and that's what I really appreciated about this book. Again, in this book there is a forced coming out scene, which I'm kind of over it, but in this case it does make a little more sense, because it results from the sibling relationship that we learn a little bit about, and also in this case the coming out scenes leads to one of my favorite parent talks joke moments. If you have read this book, you will know what I'm talking about. If you appreciated the coming out scene in Heartstopper that was at the end of season 1, you will also appreciate the coming out scene that happens in this book. I don't want to give any spoilers, but it really does genuinely make me happy to have this coming out scene in here, even though it is a forced coming out. The book does have a bittersweet ending. I personally loved that, but I know that not everybody feels the same way about it, and some people would have wished for something different. Again, I don't want to give any spoilers, but if you are not into bittersweet endings, or you are hoping for like a fairy tale happily ever after, then this won't make you happy. It will, but the end won't. And if you're looking for something that has all the cozy, heartwarming feelings, but none of the teenage anxiety, and also a happy end to it, then the other work from the same author and illustrator might be for you. It is called The Witch Boy. It's a whole trilogy. It is amazing. It's also very queer. I very nearly included these books in this video as well, but for the purposes of keeping it somewhat short, I didn't. But yeah, can also recommend them. If you already know The Girl from the Sea and want something that's maybe for an older audience, or is a lot more darker, then this one might be for you. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Mamo or Mamo. I'm gonna go with Mamo. Sorry in case that's wrong. And it is a story about Ola and Joe. Ola being the youngest in a line of witches, who has to return to the village where she grew up in after her grandmother Mamo died, and the village is a kind of a mess. Like the sea can't be fished anymore, and the crops go sour, and there is a ghost living in the attic, and all that is caused by the aftermath of the grandmother's death. And Joe reaches out to Ola and asks for help, and the two of them go on a little adventure to try and help the town. The story was, I think, told from Joe's perspective a lot of the times, but it did feel like it focused more on the themes going on in Ola's life, with like returning back home, returning to the place where you grew up in, and also returning to a place where you experienced abuse, you experienced trauma essentially, and feeling responsible for that place and having responsibility to take care of that place, versus wanting to run away and wanting to do your own thing, which I could relate to, but it is in need of content warnings. Again, I can recommend Storygraph to look at content warnings. Some that I would give are isolation, abuse, emotional manipulation, maybe some element of confinement, and just childhood trauma. Also, as I've mentioned, this book is set in the aftermath of Ola's grandmother's death. So if you're currently grieving someone or someone has died in your life recently, this might not be the book for you. So please proceed with caution. Kind of juxtaposed to Ola's very dark and sinister family background, we have Joe's experience of a family being very welcoming and very sweet and loving. And yeah, I just wanted to give all of them a hug immediately. They are so lovely. I loved all the characters in this book. They all felt really well fleshed out. At times I wish the pacing would have been a bit slower, especially in the beginning. It feels like we're kind of rushing through the story and rushing into the adventure. And I wish we would have, for example, spent more time with Joe's family and learned a little bit more about them. They are, like, the family is has a Filipino background, though I cannot remember whether that is actually confirmed in the book or just like headcanon within the fandom and within the reviews. Joe's family being Filipino and Ola the witch being a white person brings me to my main criticism about this book, and that is that maybe, potentially, and I'm not sure about this, this could be slightly problematic in terms of white saviorism, because the village essentially is drawn into chaos and drawn into like a really big mess as a result of a white person, Mamo, having all the power to herself and keeping all the power to herself and being very manipulative and doing her own thing. And then another white person has to come in and save the place. So, you know, doesn't really feel great. The magic system in this book kind of saves it a little bit for me, because the magic system is based on the principle of power shared as power doubled. And spoiler alert, Ola is throughout the story sharing knowledge and sharing power with Joe, and in the end also passes on the hat, the witch's hat, so to speak, to Joe. That kind of saves it a bit in my mind, because Ola does take responsibility for the mess that her grandmother has created and then doesn't stay behind to keep all the power to herself. But obviously, as a white person, maybe it's not my place to judge whether the whole white savior aspect of this is a no-go or not. If you have any insight on it, I would love to read about it in the comments. The reason I included this book, even though I'm not sure about it politically, is because I appreciated the quietness of the story. Like, it does feel very soft and gentle and also really dark, but it feels like a story without any like grand gestures or drama or big reveals. There are some reveals, there are some plot twists, but it feels like a very calm, let's retreat into the forest kind of story. And my dream life is pretty much to have magic and live in a forest and take care of the plants of that forest. So I want to live in this world, and that's why I've included it in this list. Up next on the list is a whole series of comic books called Giant Days. They are very nostalgic for me. If you enjoyed Gilmore Girls, or if Gilmore Girls is a show that you return back to, even though you know that it has a whole lot of problematic aspects to it, but it does give you comfort because it feels nostalgic, and you also enjoy some paranormal elements, then you might like this comic book series. These books follow three young women called Esther, Daisy and Susan, who become friends because they share a residence hall at university. And in my opinion, the university vibes in this comic are just nailed perfectly. I wouldn't change it. The reason I compared them to Gilmore Girls is because the plot isn't that exciting. If you just put it down on paper, it's just three women in university. And it very much is just about the three women and their personalities and the relationships they have with each other. And I get a lot from that, but if you're looking for something that is more action driven, maybe this isn't for you. The three main characters have very different personalities to each other, but none of them is shown as like the better person or anything, which is something that I appreciated about these books. Also, all three characters have a lot of growth and character development throughout the series, and I really loved how their friendship just adapts and they like tune into each other's changing needs and changing personalities. And I love this. This is a book about like growing up and becoming an adult while pretending that you're already an adult, if that makes sense. I think if you went through like some first university years, you might be able to relate to that feeling of, I'm supposed to be on top of things now, but I have no clue what's going on. And that book gives you these vibes, and it is just about funny and brilliant and very lovable characters. The books also touch on some very serious issues like online and sexual harassment and anxiety, and probably a whole lot more. Before diving into them, I would really recommend you go and read the content warnings on maybe the Storygraph website. I will keep recommending Storygraph to you. There is a coming out arc in this book for Daisy, which I think was handled with a lot of care and very beautiful ways, because it also shows the insecurity that comes with coming out at maybe a later stage in your, like not even late, university is late, but compared to the coming out stories that are set in your high school years, university often can feel late to come out, and this is that type of story is included in these books, which I really loved and appreciated. With that being said, these books give off like early mainstream feminism vibes, which, I mean, they aren't old. I think they came out in the early 2000s, but feminism did a lot, like progressed a lot in the past few years. And I think you can just see that at the time it was really, really trying. But if you look at it from, like, if it was made today, I would immediately criticize this for not being diverse enough, for example. I haven't reread the entire series, so I'm not entirely sure how it's doing in terms of intersectionality, but like all three main characters are white people and able-bodied, and you know, it is talking about feminism, but it can be criticized for being very white feminist. So be aware of that. I think I am still drawn to these books because they allow me to reflect on my own experiences, on university, on like how you grow into a full human and grow into like a more complex person, not just in like maybe your emotional life, but also in your politics. And I think these books allow me to reflect on younger versions of myself, and also they are just light-hearted and funny, and yeah, if you just need something to kind of tune out for a bit, it is like watching Gilmore Girls on Netflix. I will keep saying that. In case somebody loves these books but hates Gilmore Girls, sorry. And lastly on the list we have The Times I Knew I Was Gay, which is a graphic memoir about growing up and coming out again and coming out again to yourself and to the people around you. I would say it's a story about compulsory heterosexuality and what that does to you, and how it feels to come out over and over again and then somehow find yourself dating men, which is a path that feels very real and very relatable to me, and probably also many other queer people out there. This book does a beautiful job in showing that coming out isn't a linear thing and isn't like this one big lifetime event, and it just happens over and over again. And also you feel like you're going in circles, and everybody who doesn't understand what big a deal it still is to come out, I really would recommend this book too. This book also really explains beautifully that being out isn't the same as being out and proud, and being out doesn't mean you're entirely comfortable or confident in your identity, and that especially after coming out and feeling like, oh no, maybe I'm one of those baby queers, that also has a lot of insecurities to it and a lot of confusion and can be really difficult. Another thing I found really relatable in this memoir is the importance of fictional characters. In this case, it was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I definitely had my own fictional characters where I was like, okay, hi, which for me did a really well job at like illustrating that representation does matter. Representation isn't a solution, but it does matter. And in case you're having doubts about that, I think examples like this can be really important. This book feels very warm and inviting. It does feel like an art journal to me. Originally, these pages were published in DIY zines, and I think that still shines through. In my opinion, that's a really good thing in some aspects because it has that feeling of being raw and honest and very personal and vulnerable. In other aspects, the story does feel a little bit fragmented or puzzled together, and I've read some people reading that as like rambling and not having a very clear plot line, which for me just reflects the whole coming out journey and the feeling you sometimes get of like, is this real? Am I rambling? What is happening? So I appreciated that, but if you're looking for something that is maybe conceptualized as a book and less as a sketchbook or art journal, then maybe Genderqueer could be the book for you, which is also a graphic memoir, but I think has more of a graphic novel feel to it than this, which reads as like a very personal sketchbook entry at times, which again I really loved about this book, but if it's not for you, then maybe don't read it. Also, this book needs content warnings for anxiety and panic attacks and also eating disorders. And again, in case I forgot any content warnings, please look them up on Storygraph in case that's important to you. And yeah, these were the books that I currently enjoyed revisiting and have a very close spot to my heart. If you have any suggestions on queer comics and graphic novels, they are always appreciated. Please leave them in the comments, and also let me know what you think of the books that I included in this video. I will talk to you again in 2 weeks or next week. We'll see. Talk soon. Bye.